Welcome to the Future of Tourism podcast. I'm David Peacock.
Stop owning your own content.
Young leaders are stepping up.
Bring everyone to the table
and imagine their world anew.
Community relevance, equity, diversity and inclusion, sustainability, and regeneration have all vaulted to first place in CEO thinking. The Destinations International Advocacy Team released their Canadian Tourism Lexicon this week, and the words region, government, indigenous, and collective made not only the list this time, but all three of them immediately vaulted into a top 10 position. On the destination development and product development front, it's a little harder to pick out initiatives that have been able not just to move forward, but actually flourish in these difficult conditions. Outdoor asset building in Huntington, Pennsylvania stands out, as does the alignment and branding work in Quad City, Iowa, and Illinois. Add to that list the Esports Initiative that was launched by Waterloo Region Sport Hosting Office in Canada. Waterloo Region, an hour west of Toronto in Ontario, Canada, has been working on its hosting capability for the better part of 7 years. The Regional Tourism Office, RTO4, and 3 municipalities of Kitchener, Waterloo, and Cambridge, along with Waterloo Regional Tourism Marketing Corp, identified sport hosting as a USP and a competitive strength for the region. In 2015, they collectively set to work to build a sport hosting office that would serve the citizens of the 3 cities. The objective? Be the third most successful sport hosting destination in the province. So what to do during a pandemic? Well, Waterloo Region Sport Hosting Office looks south to North Carolina, where Denny Edwards and Lauren Gold at the Greater Raleigh Visitors and Convention Bureau had spent the better part of a decade building one of the East Coast's most successful esport destinations. With insights from Raleigh and access to the consultation team that helped drive their success, Waterloo Region was not only able to maintain the inertia of their nascent sport hosting office during the pandemic, but actually managed to launch the official Waterloo Regional Esports Commission. Quite an accomplishment in 2 years of rolling lockdowns, cancellation, and uncertainty. Allister Scorgie is the Director of Sport Hosting at Visit Waterloo Region, and Ed Tomasi is the Co-Founder and Chief Marketing Director at esports powerhouse Subnation Media. Good morning, Allister. How are you? Where are you? What's it like?
How am I? I'm good. Facing the continued uncertainty that we've been dealing with for a long time, and I'm in beautiful and freezing cold Stratford, Ontario, Canada this morning.
Very good. Good morning, Ed. It's good to see you again.
Morning,
we've done a
David.
few of these. How are you? Where are you? What's it like?
Doing well, recovering from COVID, even though I had a couple jabs in the arm, but all good. Being here from Raleigh, North Carolina, getting ready for a little bit of wintry weather. But as we say, just wait till 11 o'clock and everything will be melted away.
Well, it's not going to be that way here in Canada. Not outside Toronto, Ontario today. So, Allister, just give us some context. I want to talk about the Esports Initiative. I think it's a remarkable piece of work that couldn't have been more timely in terms of its ability to bring a community together, but also more timely in the fact that it leveraged some of the disadvantages we had out there. Like we were only able to e-communicate, which I believe has actually firmly vaulted it forward. But before we get into esports, tell us about the Sport Hosting Office, because it's a very strategic and thoughtful implementation of a plan to see the region achieve its deserved place in the sport hosting sort of hierarchy of Ontario. So tell us a little bit about that, please.
Well, I think that the genesis of the sport hosting office really comes from the complexity that Waterloo Region has in its DNA. We are 3 cities, 4 townships, 2 universities, a college. Split all of them up, they're not that big, but combined, it's approaching 1 million people here in 2022. And over the years, everyone has been trying and doing reasonably good job at sport hosting, bringing events to the region, but doing them in their individual lanes. And I think in the past decade, we really saw the opportunity and the need to be collaborative, have that single one-stop shop point of contact to bring events and work on events here in the region. That's given us a good opportunity to leverage our resources better. We can combine, bring in bigger events, bring in more partnerships. It's really elevated the sport hosting experience. So going into 2020, pre-pandemic, we were well positioned to hit the event market and really, chase down the big dreams and the events that we wanted to bring here. So the table was set, and we just didn't know what was lurking around the corner with COVID, which changed course and made us all stop in our tracks and say, "Well, what do we do now?" Because
Well,
it's not going to be what we thought.
okay, so lurking around the corner was Ed Tomasi. Let's call it Ed Tomasi was lurking around the corner. Ed, you meet Allister early on, and it was that intro through the Greater Raleigh CVB that did that. Tell me about how you met Allister and what the program was.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, a client of ours that we were working with in an advisory role for esports strategy, uh, Raleigh, North Carolina, at the Convention and Visitors Bureau and Sports Alliance level, had that was sort of the connector, right? And so the introduction came to Subnation through that lens, meaning that there was a qualified need from the Waterloo region folks to develop a strategy specific to them, and that they had looked at Raleigh as sort of a model, and that they were really interested in moving forward. So when the introductions were made, it wasn't like there was a sales process. It was more of, okay, we want to partner with you because we understand that strategy is important and execution is even more. We've seen what you've been doing with other destinations, including Raleigh, North Carolina, and we wanted to work with you to develop our own.
So that's a great point. The comparison to Raleigh. Alistair, you did your homework before you looked at esports. You really did vet its viability. You had a number of great reasons for your intuition that esports would work, and not the least of which is your relationship with the universities. The fact that Kitchener, Waterloo, and Cambridge is one of the highest tech centers in the country. Tell me a bit about your thinking on esports and how, in the middle of literally lockdowns and cancellations, you were able to see your way clear to thinking, this could actually, this could not just work, but this actually could be a real jewel during this difficult time. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to really, identify that we didn't do esports just because of the pandemic. It was on the radar pre-COVID. It was circled, written down, and kind of sitting on the table. And really, the big question was, how do we take the first step, or what is the first step? Because we knew that the DNA of Waterloo Region as an education community, as a tech center, the pieces were there for esports to thrive. We knew there was some grassroots esports programming taking place. We certainly didn't have an entity like the sport hosting office in place to help esports thrive. So that's really where it started was, well, what's the first step? And Raleigh and finding out what they had done there. A lot of similarities with Waterloo Region in terms of the community. Even on a larger scale, being down the road from Charlotte, Waterloo's down the road from Toronto, and yet esports was thriving in Raleigh. And we thought, they figured it out. Let's talk to who's working on it there and see if they can help us take the first steps to figure out how to make it happen here. So we had all the pieces. It was just trying to put them together on the puzzle board and figure out, okay, this is who we can be and this is how we're going to do it.
So Ed, you've had the luxury of sitting on both these projects, and I think they're both immensely cool projects. Raleigh, that I knew about first, but tell us about the similarities you see. I mean, the universities were an obvious hook. The two centers, both centers have high tech universities. I believe in Raleigh is Electronic Arts company head offices there, or something similar. How did that come around?
So yeah, that was Epic Games. We also
Games.
have Ubisoft and a number of other developers um, in our market. So in that sense, Raleigh is very lucky, and to have those type of corporate citizens within its ecosystem. But when I first did the deep dive into the DNA of Waterloo Region, found those similarities very quickly in the universities, in the gaming communities, uh, and as well as the facilities and infrastructure. We look at a lot of different check boxes. If I were to put my esports production hat on, there's a long list of check boxes that need to be checked off in order to consider and commit to hosting an esports event within a specific destination. And when we started looking, our team started at Subnation started looking through this checklist, and in the lens of an esports production company with producing an event in Waterloo Region, a lot of those check boxes were being checked off from again a willingness from a top level as well as the desire from the bottom up level. That was really key. And the other thing that was key is that it wasn't about that transaction. It was about how to develop the partnerships with all the various community points from the university and collegiate side to the technology perspective, but as well as from hosting venues and sports teams as well. So I think when we look at as a group, we look at developing a unique esports ecosystem for each individual destination. When we deep dive into the Waterloo region, we knew we had something very special because it checked off all those boxes, and we felt it could be a very healthy and sustainable esports ecosystem.
Well, so the right people, the right time, the right place. Allister, I've watched you work for not quite 2 years on the alignment piece, even before esports. You are a community-based builder. Your previous work was with Sport Canada and other sport groups, Paralympics. When you dive into it with Ed and you look at it, he's talking about creating communities of esports. That completely aligns with your strategy, doesn't it?
Yeah, because how are you going to differentiate yourself from other destinations? And we know that with esports, it's surging now. It's still relatively new, especially in Canada. I can't think of a large number of communities that have taken the approach that we have. But from a sport side, a lot of it translates. Everyone's got arenas, everyone's got pools, everyone's got gyms and fields. What's going to set you apart? Well, it's relationships, it's engagement in the community, it's having the base of support there. I'm one person. I'm not going to host an event start to finish and make it a reality. It's the volunteers, it's the staff, it's the venue operators. And we knew with esports, to Ed's point, transactional wouldn't work. If we went out and bid on or chased a major event to bring it to the odd, is anyone going to show up? Is it going to go well? Is it going to fall on its face? Are we going to do a good job? We don't want that to be the case. We want to be a credible destination. And that means we need to bring in the experts. We need to connect with the community. We need to kind of build that structure for everyone to collaborate and work together. So that's always been the goal with esports. We're starting a little further down the road, at a grassroots level to build that up to get to that point. But that's what we did with sport hosting. It's the engagement with the municipalities, the universities, the community. And if we can leverage that to esports, we've got a good base to start from.
What do you have to say to that, Ed? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, what Alex just said earlier about having the trust of the global community as being a trusted host for sports is part of that history. It's part of that esports readiness that we look for as an advisor. It's one thing for a market of any size to have a desire to host esports, but when you have a destination that has the experience and trust of the sports community that has already proven its value in its own ecosystem to be that host and valued host and trusted host for a successful event, that is something that many don't have, even at the larger city levels, right? So when we first looked at Waterloo Region, we really got excited because it already had this trust from the community of athletes to to the community of sport hosting groups. So what Allister said before, one thing we didn't mention, but it's so important, is that there was an established trust, and that is your baseline. If you don't have that, you got to build that, and to build that takes a lot longer than it is to be an esports ready destination. And Waterloo Region had it.
Well, and I think that goes back to, we were talking on the opening about the importance of the lexicon and the idea that region, government, collective, community are four of the most important words in Canadian tourism right now. I'm excited that Waterloo Region's been able to build an aligned base around tourism. Allister, you have a municipal accommodation tax that was passed about 3.5 years ago. It funds the DMO. The DMO runs in a cooperative agreement with four major entities, which is the City of Kitchener, the City of Cambridge, City of Waterloo, and then of course the Regional Tourism Office. That's that beginning of that cooperation. But that's just the beginning. Then you have to go out and foster it. During the pandemic, esports hasn't just presented you with a challenge and an opportunity to build a single, vertical product piece. It's allowed you to build those connections better. I'm going to suggest to you that the pandemic has probably accelerated the opportunity for esports and made it easier, and at the same time kept a number of communication channels open that might have atrophied during COVID. What do you say to that, Allister?
Well, I think there's two pieces to that. One is generally in the sport hosting world, you're constantly in the event cycle. You're in the bidding, securing, hosting, repeat process, and that sucks up a lot of time. So with COVID being the disruption that it has, that really did change the dynamics of our week to week, month to month work plan. The bandwidth to maybe take on more of the calls, build more relationships, do more outreach is probably the highest it's ever been. We haven't really had the events or programs that we'd like to drive those conversations, but the capacity's there. So working with Ed and Subnation, as we started to chip away at announcing this is what we're going to do, or we're going to form the Waterloo Region Esports Commission, the outreach that came in from that, from community-based organizations that were saying, hey, this is awesome. Like, we've been waiting for something like this for years. Let's talk esports. Let's talk what we can do. Let's talk how we can get involved. That was huge, because it all of a sudden those tentacles went out into the world, whether it was in Waterloo Region or external, saying, we love what you're doing, we love what the approach is, we want to get involved. So COVID certainly helped in that way. And then virtual, right? Like, a lot of the conversations we're having aren't face to face. Ed and I have never met. We've been working together for 1.5 years. We've never stood in a room together, but that's given us actually a lot of opportunity to engage with groups that maybe we couldn't have if we were in the office and in person. So COVID's been a challenge, but it has opened some doors certainly to help us move things forward.
Ed, on the esports horizon in general, you get a very good 40,000 foot view of this. You work all over the country. You were asked to speak in Chicago. I know you had a conflict and you couldn't do that a couple months ago, but you're over there and around the country. What are you seeing in the esports fronts that's directly related to COVID? What didn't you expect, or what surprises you?
I wouldn't say things have surprised me, because I've been in the esports industry for 20 years, and we've always been the underdog from the beginning years. But then, as the world sort of accepted the fact that this was a new form of entertainment and saw the power of live stream and visibility and integration in with education curriculum as well as entertainment, and being an integral part of people's quality of place, it really has taken hold within traditional groups that you wouldn't really expect them to have a focus, or even the word esports in a plan, right? Like a 5 or 10 year or 20-year plan. What I'm seeing now,
groups like who? That's an interesting.
Groups like destinations. There's certain destinations, DMOs that are out there that are just that are now having studies done that have terms of esports and integrating in. About 5 years ago, there was like an article that came out. I don't know if it was in Forbes, but it mentioned like if you're a CMO, a chief marketing officer, and you do not know what esports is at this point, and again, this is 5 years ago. If you're a CMO and don't know what esports is, you should be fired. And it literally said that in the article. And I think since then, it has become this household name.
So Ed, are you saying
Yeah.
to us, and I hadn't thought of this, that the bulk of Subnation's work isn't definitely with DMOs, that DMOs who actually tackle esports head on still are early trailblazers, or is it mainstream? Is it early adopter? How is that? I hadn't thought of it.
I think for the past, I would say past 3 to 4 years, there has been an internal discussion around how to navigate esports. And I bet Allister has some better insight since he has colleagues in the industry and that have had similar conversations. But what we've seen as advisors and just me just looking out into the destination world is that they really didn't have any champion within their own internal group that fully understood what esports was and how it could play an integral part in their economic development, in their destination's quality of place. So they perhaps assigned one person that may have been on maybe the younger side, or maybe had dabbled in gaming, or knew someone who knew someone, and sort of put them at the forefront of championing their strategy, which was, again, I think back at that time, in the lens of this transactional.
So that's really interesting. That's very interesting. I hadn't thought of it in that context. So Allister, let's ask the question Ed asked, which is, 4 years ago, you're sitting outside the sport hosting office. You're working with Paralympics, I think. What was the perception of esports? I'm very interested now that Ed's put the question in my head.
I think Ed's keying on the right thing there, and I think 4 years ago, esports kind of seemed far away. It seemed like something that happened in other parts of the world, huge in Asia, huge in Europe, not something you've had a lot of exposure to, at least for me in Canada. I didn't see events happening in Ottawa or Toronto that were esports. We're still a very sport focused country. I think that's shifted in the last 4 years, but to Ed's point, I think a lot of it has to do with exposure and familiarity. If it's not something that you're seeing or experiencing or aware of, it's kind of off your radar. And there's also a generational gap there too, right? Esports is a young person's game, no pun intended. A lot of the people that we're talking to in leadership positions, management positions, maybe didn't grow up in a gaming culture or in the world of esports, and that's shifted now. Kids now are on Discord and Reddit and streaming, watching gaming on Twitch. That wasn't happening 20 years ago. So there's this huge shift in the way people are consuming content and entertainment and gaming, and the world's kind of catching up to it and realizing that, oh yeah, my kid is watching someone play video games for 8 hours a day because they like that. And how do we tap into that? How do we start to familiarize ourselves? So that's been the big thing. Anything we've done with esports, if it's media, PR, the question I always get is, what is esports and why does esports matter? We're still chipping away at that conversation because it's still new for a lot of people.
Well, and as Ed said to me in a previous broadcast, time to level up. And if you don't know what that means, you need an education. So on that front, let's close this out by doing a couple of things that are practical. Lots of destinations are becoming aware of esports. They're not there. I think we've established that fairly well, but they're thinking about it. Esports like trail riding, like mountain bike riding, like aquatics, like museums, you either have them or you don't in your DNA. So there's DNA of a destination that makes it more viable to launch esports. And they don't have to be the same DNA. I can think of regional centers in remote northern communities that actually could be small, independent, community-based esport destinations, or there's the great big mega centers like Toronto. But as destinations consider whether or not esports could be an addition to their strong product offering, and we like to call that their DNA. What kind of things they should consider back and forth between the two of you? Yeah, I'll go first with you, Ed. What kind of things do they look at first as they consider the esports journey?
Yeah, so as we move out of this, if we want to call this phase one of discovery, right? And as a destination discovers who and what it is and how it could position itself within the esports ecosystem and build its own locally and regionally, this next phase is sort of a decision and balance between bringing or building. Could they bring esports events and activities and programs, and or can they build their own? And so there's going to be a phase now where destinations are going to start investing their time and resources into understanding which of the two, and perhaps the strategy is both. Do they approach? Do they approach it to build? Do they approach it to bring? Do they approach it to both?
Now, in both cases, some of the benchmarks and the outcomes you're looking for is how significantly successful can they be? How close are they to other competitors? What's the market currently served? Like, Allister, those considerations go through your head, but what would you add to that list if you were counseling your peers around the world as they look at esports?
I think you want to build the right way. To Ed's point, it's build and bring, and it's a little chicken and egg. Do you create something that draws in more events coming from other parts of the world, or do you just go out and hunt down and try and bid and secure events? I don't think one is right or wrong, but the approach and taking your time to do it the right way, engaging the right partners is the thing to do. I've never been of the mind that we can be in a if you build it they will come mentality, whether that's an event or a capital project like an esports space. You need the community first to ensure that that's viable and it's going to work and it suits what the community needs. So that's a big part of it. But I think it's just knowing who you are, knowing your lane. Be opportunistic. I think Ed and I have talked about that as well. If the right event comes along, we're not going to turn it down just because we don't feel like we're ready. We'll have the conversation to see if we can make it fit. But we also don't want to go outside of what our capacity is or our capability is. So it's just this fine balance of let's do what we know we can do. Let's work with our partners at a local level, and then the rest will come, and we'll start to engage and work as needed, where needed, when needed.
So you both talked about partnership. You've talked about positioning. You've talked about understanding your lane. You talked about the necessity for building, obviously, esports strategies that fit your community. Allister, I'm hearing in loud and clear that Waterloo does have what Ed would call that hybrid. It's building and it's bringing, and it's looking for a balance therein. I think the building part's tremendously important. I think if you don't let people help you build a house, then they never know where you live, right? So that's brilliant. Final parting words. I'll go first with you, Allister, to your peers in sports, in esports. What are we looking at in the next 5 years?
In the next 5 years, well, that's a good question. Sometimes I don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 weeks right now. I think we're in, talking with Ed just yesterday, we're in a period of transition with esports. In the last year and a half with Subnation and the work we've done in Waterloo Region, it's really been setting the table. Let's figure out our identity. Let's figure out the roadmap. And we are starting to shift into the let's get stuff done and let's make things happen. COVID is hanging around, unfortunately. And I really do want to see us get to the in-person event side of things because if we've lost anything during the pandemic, it's community. It's the gathering of people and being able to be together. So I really hope this year we can get to that point, whether it's our esports camps that we launched last year in 2021, bringing those back, getting to some of those community-based events. That's the goal this year. And then build. I want to see an esports venue in Waterloo Region in the next 5 years. That'll probably be done in partnership. Where it is, how it comes together, I don't know yet, but we need that space. I want to see that exist for our gaming community, and I want to see us as a credible host. I want to see events coming to us in the next 5 years to say we want to host in Waterloo Region.
So I'm going to throw it to Ed, but before I do that, Allister, I want to touch on one point that's really important to the people listening. You have managed also to secure funding from steady partners that have been at the table and remain committed to this even through the pandemic. The three cities, Waterloo Regional Tourism Marketing, the Regional Tourism Office, all of them see the importance of this initiative and have committed to funding going forward. So that helps, doesn't it?
It's huge, and especially in the last couple of years when using that funding effectively has been such a challenge. In 2020, we had to really pivot and readjust and say, okay, what are we going to do now? And esports was a big part of that. But maintaining that commitment, and I think for anyone listening that works in the world of tourism, sport hosting, esports, you can't plan these things and activate them in a couple months. A lot of what we do is long term. We're thinking 2 years, 3 years down the road. We're thinking when COVID's gone. And that, as far back as 2020, in the throes of the pandemic, was, well, what do you do in June of 2020? I'm thinking about 2023. That's the lane that we need to keep our eyes on, because that's how far out we have to think about these events and these programs. We need the funding now. We need the support now to build for the future. It's not flipping a switch and events show up. So that support is massive.
Well, and congratulations to you for getting off what I call the 12-month mill wheel. It's really hard to build a business on a 12-month budget. So good on that. Ed, final question back to you. Same thing. Next 5 years, what do you see? What's important?
Well, I think the awareness specific to Waterloo Region, and the awareness of its capacity, capabilities, and readiness, is going to bear fruit in terms of developing those relationships and programs. And those programs may not be the 25,000 seat arena type of projects. They may be local and regional wins. But I do see that it does get a quick recognition. Waterloo Region that gets quick recognition from all the work and planning and information gathering and readiness that it has worked so hard to achieve within the past year and a half, 2 years. From my perspective, the next phase that moves from now into the next 5 years is collaboration. So where there were independent groups within destinations that were exploring esports, the fact that Waterloo Region has defined and invested in its resources into defining what esports is to the destination, it fast forwards a lot of that thinking and planning for the other organizations, whether they're colleges, whether they're businesses looking to move in to the market and engage its graduates or residents as employees and members of their company. It's collaboration. It's now working at the same table to develop this build or bring with resources, funding, and priorities.
So guys, I can't thank you enough. I do want to underline, I think the Esports Initiative that you've been able to A, identify, B, shape, launch, and then actually formalize with your Esports Commission, to accomplish that in COVID is a remarkable achievement. I've said it to you before. Great work, Allister. Great work, Ed. I am encouraged by the genesis of this comes from a sharing piece with another DMO. I think this is a great industry for people sharing across borders and learning things. And I just want to say the same thing to you guys. Thanks for sharing. It's super helpful as we're out there trying to rebuild communities and create our unique identities. And this is obviously a key part of this going forward. Marking the metaverse aside, esports is here to stay.
That's right.
Sure
Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate you bringing the topic and energy to the cause, and it's been an honor for the folks here at Subnation to be working with such a forward-thinking destination as Waterloo Region.
Yeah, in a last couple of years of a lot of challenges and turbulent times, this has been a shining light for me and a real win for the region. And I'm really excited about what's coming next. So thank you to Ed and his team for everything they've done so far, and David, yourself, RTO, for the continued support. I think we really are changing our identity here in Waterloo Region as it pertains to sport hosting and esports.